Alright, so today we're going to be making a flight out of Grand Forks International in the Beechcraft Hawker 850 XP from Coronado. And this is one of it's an older jet, but it has a pretty complex start procedure, but it's still a nice airplane. And it also has a digital panel and everything. Alright, so this is the startup procedure I have for it. And it's, as you can see, it's really complex. There's a lot of steps that go into it. So the first thing we're gonna do is check. So trims are centered, thrust reversers are stowed, parking brake applied. We're gonna apply the parking brake. We're gonna trip the generators so we can get the APU running and everything, and also the batteries on. And then we're gonna make sure the bus tie is closed. We're gonna isolate the battery, which we're gonna turn off the battery isolation or turn it to norm, which means we have two batteries on this airplane, battery 1 and battery 2. So we're gonna the isolation. So say you want to only operate on one of the batteries, then so say battery 1 has issues, then you'd click that to battery 1, and then that means you're isolating that battery, only using battery 2. But we're gonna set it to norm because we want to use both. Then we're going to turn on batteries 1 and 2 because neither are isolated, so both are going to go on. And then we're going to turn on the 2 alternators, and then we're going to go to the APU. Now the APU is in kind of a strange position for this aircraft, but it's still okay to get to. So first thing we're gonna do is turn it on, and we're gonna make sure the tests are running. So we're gonna turn this up, and so the lamp test is just to make sure all the lights are working and everything. It also turns on a lot of the lights, so everything looks good. And also you can click on stuff to make sure it works. Like say you want to test this, now you know the fire works, and this button is to shut down the APU completely. So the next thing you're gonna do is turn on the bleed air, which is the compression, and make the cabin pressurized. So you should always make sure that the cabin door is shut before you turn on the APU and the bleed air, because otherwise you're gonna pressurize the aircraft, and it's gonna be depressurized. So you have to make sure that's shut before you turn on the bleed air. The next thing you're gonna do is gonna make sure everything's back on these instruments here, and then you're gonna start it. You're gonna trip this generator, and then you're gonna start it, and you can see all the lights turn on, and it's gonna start to operate itself. And this, if you leave the APU off, as you can see, a lot of stuff is gonna start turning on and testing, such as the engine switches and everything. Now once this gets to 6/10, this gets somewhere in the green, and this gets to 100%, we're gonna turn the generator to off. We're gonna leave it at on, and as you can see, it kind of flips up and then it flips itself back down to the on position, so that's good. And then we're gonna turn off the lamp test and the OVV test, and that looks good. Now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna disengage the MWS, also known as the master warning system. And then we're gonna make sure the thrust reversers are unarmed. So I could actually, if I started the engines and I pulled this back to, it would snap, the computer would make this snap back down, because because the engines are running right now. But if the engines were running and I pulled this back, it wouldn't activate if we have the thrust reversers unarmed. And the reason why we want those unarmed is because if we bump the thrust reverser on takeoff, or something happens to the engine when we're in the air, or anything like that, we want these in the off position so that we don't reverse a thruster in midair or on takeoff, because it would result in casualty for the aircraft and the passengers and pilot and whatever. Next thing we're going to do is turn on the standby horizon. Now this thing has its own generator, so you have to arm it and make sure that it centers itself before you take off. So say your computers fail, then you still have this whole backup thing. Now this airplane, it has lightning protection coating around the entire airplane and fuselage and everything, but if you do get struck by lightning, there is a little chance, but there is a possibility where your computers and stuff could shut down. And this thing has its own, it's concealed in its own coating, so if something goes wrong, this won't shut down. And again, this is very unlikely, but it's just a backup, and it's a nice thing just to have around. The next thing you're gonna activate is the cabin power, and just like that. So those are both gonna be activated, and then we're gonna rework the inverter. So the standby inverter is unarmed, and then we're gonna start the inverters. Now that you just click on it, and then it's just gonna go to start and then snap itself back just like that. That just means you're starting it. Now that has to do with fuel flow and stuff like that. That's what the inverters operate. Now we're gonna turn on the engine computers, and then we're gonna turn on the fuel transfers. We're gonna make sure that the fuel transfers are not on. We're gonna make sure they're off, and they're both up here in this up position, because if you turn them on, they're down there, and this one would just be down as well. So make sure that they're both up here, because those are the only that's what they look like when they're in the off position. And then we're gonna open the fuel valves. So these are all open, which is in the upright position. This is off. This is on. This is open. This is closed. And now that we have everything open, we're gonna turn on the fuel pumps. And the reason why we want to make sure the valves are open and transfers are not are closed. We want to make sure that the reason is because if you turn on the fuel pumps, you're going to be transferring, and without the power of the engine spooling up or operating, what could happen is you could be pumping fuel into a closed valve, or you could be pumping fuel into both wings rather than into the engine, and that's not what you want. And then the next thing you're going to do is turn on a light master, because we're going to begin turning on some cabin lights and stuff like that, and interior and exterior lights. Then we're going to make sure that the emergency light is armed, but we don't want to make sure it's off or on, because if you have something like that, then they're looking at you like you're crazy, because a perfectly good airplane should never have something like that on. And it should always be armed in case something goes wrong. You can just flip that switch right into the on position, so that arming is just making sure it's ready for action. And then you're going to go and make sure that the ELT is also armed. Now that's your emergency locator transmitter. So if something if you crash or something like that, you can turn, this is in the on position, I don't know why, but arm it so that if you need to, if you crash, you can just turn it to the on position, that red light will activate, and you want it armed. Alright, and then we're going to make sure the ignition is on. So, this is in the off position, this is on, of course, it shows this on, and it's activated because we have this light here. And I forgot to mention, if anything is red that's shown up here, it should be, you should want to get rid of it. So next thing on our checklist is pitot vane heat. You're going to turn that on, and as you can see, it just went away. So anything that's red up here needs to be gotten, you need to get rid of it. You need to fix it by simply by flipping a switch before you start the engines or get in the air. Alright, now we have our APU on, which is okay. And, oil pressure is low, of course, because we haven't started the engines. And now the next thing we have to do is engine start power, engine start activate, and then we have to turn off the APU once the engines are running, because the APU operates everything, and it's the auxiliary power unit. So the engines normally operate all the computers and everything. It's almost like the brain of the airplane. Without it, the airplane can't function. But the APU allows you to run electronics before you start the engines. So you're going to turn on the start power, which lets the engines know that you're going to start spooling them up. And then you just click on these here, and that says operating, which is good. It turns green, and you're going to hear the engines. And then ignition, we can turn that off once these spike here, once they get to 5 or 6%. So we're just going to wait for that 6%, perfect, spikes, everything looks good, engine number 1 and 2 are good, Percents look good. Fuel flow and fuel pressure looks good. Oil temperature is rising steadily. And it looks like our fuel's good. Flaps are in the upright and everything. And just check again, these are off. And then we're going to turn off the APU because now the engines are doing the work for the auxiliary power unit. So we can turn this to the off position, and as you can see, everything's going to start turning off. So this is going to start spooling itself down. Let me zoom out here, just like that. It's all going down, and that's eventually going to go to the 0 positions because we're not going to have any percents or EGTs running. And that looks good. And now that we have our lights master on, I forgot to do this beforehand, we can turn on our strobes, navigation lights, beacon, and our taxi lights. Now, the thing I wanted to show you guys about this is there's a beacon and rotating beacon and pulse. So right now we have our rotating oh, there's a fighter jet waiting. These are on, which is our rotating beacons, or anti-collision lights, and these are steady. As you can see, there's 2 lights in here, which are, these are strobes. These are extra strobes, I guess you could say, which are, and these are your steady strobes, and these are your pulsating. And then you also have your wing strobes, which are pulsing, and you also have, these are your taxi and landing lights here, and your landing lights are also on these wings, which act as strobes. So this has 3 settings, all the way in the center, and off. So we're going to set this to center, which means that everything is steady and these outer lights are operating. But then when you switch this up and when you switch this up, this also has 3 settings. When you switch everything up here, it's pulsing. And you can see that the inner lights, the larger ones, are pulsating with these 2 center ones. So that's how the lights work on this aircraft. And then you simply have your these lights are very simple too. That's a complex setup, but this is a little bit easier. Your ICE and logo lights. You turn on your logo here, which just kind of shines a light against your tail fin. And right now it's daytime, so it's kind of hard to tell. But if you look around, you might be able to see there's lights that you could spot shining on the tail, the vertical stabilizer, and that just kind of illuminates the tail and makes you easier to see at nighttime on a clear day. So you can't see it right now, but at night it'd be a lot easier to notice. So we're just going to leave that off, and then also your ICE light, which might be, that we're just going to leave that off, and that should only be on, we're just going to leave that off. And then these are just some interior lights on this side here, which are your glare shield panel. These 3 you can just click, and this, no, I'm sorry, these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, those you click, and 1, 2, 3, 4, those you can scroll. Those have like dimming. So this you can scroll all the way up, which is your glare shield panel. Your panel lights, which are all of your FMS or flight management system dials. Your console, which is your console panel, which also turns on stuff over here. Your pedestal, which are lights that kind of pop up here, I think. No, maybe not. Maybe down here. Yeah, that's right. And your floodlights. Now that you just click again, that just kind of floodlights covers the panel, just so you can see. Displays, that's just kind of these little buttons here, easier to see. Instruments turns on a lot of your very few analog, like your cabin pressure, brake pressure. I forgot to mention, if you turn on the parking brake, I think I accidentally stepped on the toe brakes and deactivated it. But this is your brakes. So this, I think, is your, let me check this here. That's your supply of hydraulic fluid, I think. And then this is your brakes, PSI, the pressure for it. And that's, so parking brake is on right now, so the brake pressure is full. And then toe brakes, turn it to 1,000%. I'm sorry, pressure, 1,000 PSI. And then, so everything looks good. And then you also have your angle attack meter. I'm going to show you that in a moment. if this meets 10 or exceeds 10 degrees per second increase, then you could stall the airplane on takeoff. Alright, so everything should be good to go. Everything checks out, and I think we're ready to take off. So we're going to disengage the parking brake. Alright, air brake is in upright position. Again, trims are centered. We checked that. Valves are open, everything. We're good to go. So we're going to add flaps, which is this switch right here. Now the nice thing about this plane is it has an indicator right here that shows you your flaps. But sometimes it blocks the view, and also you have the throttles. I'm pretty sure it'd be easier to see in real life, but on the sim, a lot of stuff is blocking it. The flaps, you have an indicator up here, which shows you, and you also have that one below. So that's good. We got 10 degrees of flaps, and we're good to go. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, just so you guys can read the panel. Alright. That looks good. And we have, I think we have a lot of traffic on our side waiting. Okay, yeah, that's right. The fighter jet disappeared, or he went, yeah, he disappeared. Wait, something just happened. Oh, there it goes. Alright, so, let's get out of here. So we're just going to give it a little bit of power. Once it gets to 50%, we're going to give it full. And then we're just going to try to keep it centered, and there's a little bit of a headwind, and it just happens to be right down the runway, which is kind of got lucky. 80 knots, V1. Rotate. Alright. Positive rate. Gear up. Flaps up. V2. Alright. Now, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, we're flying out of Grand Forks International in North Dakota. Alright. And as I mentioned before, this airplane, it has a stalling characteristic, which is why you have that angle of attack meter. So if right now we're in the gray area, which is good. That's what you want. Orange is where the airplane becomes more sensitive to the to the aerodynamic control in relation to the airflow around the wing, and that could put you in the red. And the red zone is what you don't want to exceed because it puts you above 10. So say never do this, but this is just for an example. If you pull back a lot and it goes into the 10, it'll stall. So that meter at slower airspeeds, right now we're at a higher airspeed, but let me dump the airspeed real quick. And as you can see, if we try climbing at a slower airspeed, it's gonna stall. And the nice thing a lot of these jets have is it shutters the whole